Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the American Institute of Stress. Our webinar today, the presenter for our webinar today is Dr. Cynthia Howard. Dr. Howard is an executive coach and performance expert who works with professionals, leaders, and organizations to activate resilience and improve performance. She is a pioneer in the resilient mindset and the resilient pyramid, and Cynthia provides a roadmap for leaders to navigate the negative consequences of stress. She's also a fellow in the American Institute of Stress, and she holds a green belt in Lean Six Sigma. And she is also a certified trainer in the Institute of Heartmath. Welcome, Dr. Howard.
Thank you.
And you can take it away.
Okay, awesome. Well, we are going to talk about overload. And when we originally talked about this webinar, the COVID situation was not even on the radar, so it's, I think, very appropriate. I wanted to talk about how technology has actually changed the way we live, work, and communicate, but that and how much more life has changed as a result of the COVID. So the reason I have an elephant in there is because it's a metaphor for those things that get bigger and heavier if you ignore them. And stress is one of those things. So we are going to be talking about how to identify your stress and what you can do about it. In the introduction, of course, you learned a little bit about me, but I also want to let you know that I was a nurse for my first career. I spent many years in intensive care, so I really do understand what's going on the front line, and I understand that sense of urgency that healthcare providers have. But I ended up going into the field of psychology with advanced degrees, and I researched the impact of stress on performance. And in my early days, when I started my practice, I actually focused more on stress management. And what I found as time moved on and as technology continued to intrude in our life, stress management was limited. We actually needed to build our resilience. So we're going to talk about these points, how technology has made us more vulnerable to stress, and why managing these emotions and stress is so important. You're going to learn some breathing techniques that are powerful, well-researched, that you can use in the moment to help activate your resilience. But what I want you to remember is the ABCs. We're going to look at awareness. What is your awareness around stress? We're going to show you how to use your breath, and then an important connection that you want to make so that you can function at a higher level. Because one thing we all know in this world today is that stress, as it accumulates, you can function at a lesser level. And even for myself, for example, I have waves of anxiety, I have waves of anger even, I have waves of fear. So as you work through these waves, I'm going to show you tools that are going to help make those waves more like ripples so that you can move through the situation, whether it's this COVID or whether it's another situation. So there's been a lot of research now that has demonstrated how much technology has changed our brains, literally changed it. There's research on what the internet has done, how our devices have changed it, and the overwhelming constant flow of information. We have more information today than in the last hundreds of years. One study I read, there's a 300% increase in the amount of emails that executives and leaders get across their desk. But as an average person, just look at your email box. Just look at the constant information that you're being exposed to. It can be overwhelming if you haven't learned how to direct that information and how to use your technology. So when part of the problem, what researchers have found is as we toggle back and forth between social media, for example, maybe you're a fan of Twitter and you like to go on Twitter and look at the conversations and respond, and then you're going to toggle back to maybe a work project, or you're going to toggle back to a conversation that you're having with a friend. And unfortunately, some people do this while they're driving. So that constant toggling back and forth is what really shuts down our ability to be effective, because multitasking has been shown to be a myth. We aren't actually good at that. And just the other day, I was doing another webinar and I had a lot of windows open on my computer, and there was a problem with displaying the pictures and the images. And that's because the bandwidth in the computer was overloaded. And that's a good metaphor for what happens in our own brain when we have too many tabs open, if we have too many projects going at once. In fact, one study showed that half of what we do is actually a redo. So we're not as effective. There's a tendency to forget things. But one of the important things that I just found out that I think is really interesting is as we spend more time on social media and on the internet, and we get all of our news from there, we actually increase our confirmation bias, meaning that we're less open to new ideas and new information. And I don't know if you've talked to anyone who is so set in their ways that they don't even want to consider another perspective. I know I've had that experience. So the more information we have, the more we rely on technology, the more our brains actually become flabby, so to speak. We aren't learning as much because long-term memory is formed through a concentrated span of attention, say 20 minutes. Well, we're constantly scrolling, we're toggling, we're going back and forth, and there's a lot of information that is going through our short-term memory, but nothing is sticking. So in fact, technology has really changed. In fact, one of the terms that I've heard, I don't know if you've heard it, but digital dementia. Even those technology natives, so to speak, the millennials and the younger generation that grew up actually with technology as part of their life, they also are experiencing these things. That's why there's increased anxiety in the younger generation. The short-term memory is compromised with the more technology that we use. There's an increase in irritability and a false sense of urgency. So unless we can unplug and we have some periodic abstinence, our brains actually lose the ability to focus. And definitely if you have any questions, I forgot to say that in the beginning, feel free to post them here and I'll address them as we go, or I can address them at the end. So this was a study done out of Irvine, California that was really interesting. A 15-second distraction is going to cost us 25 minutes in focus and concentration. And that particular study was really interesting because that's the study that identified the false sense of urgency that happens. So as we get distracted, because this is what happens in ADD, but yet we're all in sort of a partial state of distraction these days, even without the COVID situation. We know that we're missing something. So then there's this actually trigger in the body, which I'm going to talk about, which is this a low-level stress reaction, and we start to become more anxious. What did I miss? So you might go back and reread the same paragraph, or you might, as you're listening to someone in a conversation, you might be also tuning in to your cell phone because it just beeped because the text came in. So there's no way we can keep all of this around in a cohesive way. So that loss of 25 minutes, if we even get our focus and concentration back. So unhooking for 20 minutes and using that 20 minutes to read something uninterrupted is one way that you can actually boost your ability to concentrate. It's like doing 10 minutes on the treadmill. It's like doing squats. It's like doing a plank, anything to strengthen our core and exercise. A 20-minute time out reading something uninterrupted. It can be pleasurable reading and it can be work-related reading. But if you do that every day, you're going to actually be able to improve your ability to manage your attention. So one of the things that I created is called an interruption log. So I highly recommend you keeping one for 24 hours so that you can keep track of what are my interruptions. They may come from other people, maybe a boss. Those are actually two of the highest types of interruptions. But believe it or not, they come from ourselves. Are you hungry? Are you frustrated? Do you just, when something gets a little tough, you break away and you go and scroll on the internet? Our brain is addicted to novelty. And the internet feeds that addiction very nicely. So this interruption log is going to help you understand what are the patterns here and how long am I interrupted and how much does it completely distract me from my focus. Because in the ABC, A is awareness. So the biggest part of any strategy to deal with stress, to activate resilience, to manage how you're doing in any type of crisis is knowing what's going on within you. So this is the major problem with distraction. Attention is our most important resource. How well do you manage your attention? Because that is going to be a critical element in how well you're going to be able to manage your stress. And even before the COVID crisis, our attention span was already compromised. And one byproduct of this COVID is people are sheltering in place, staying at home, more people are online. And unfortunately, that can make this situation even worse, have people be more reactive, less open. Why is this important and why do I like to focus on this? Because never before has it been more significant. We can't get more time. That's the one resource we can't recreate. Can always get more money, more people, more opportunities, all kinds of other resources you can get more of. But one thing we can't get more of is time. So one of the biggest complaints I hear is I don't have the time to do that. I'm always busy. So I think people are spending their time instead of investing their time. So I'm going to talk about a couple of techniques where you will invest your time so that it actually pays you forward versus wasting your time redoing work, dealing with clutter, handling distractions. So you've probably seen this acronym before, the VUCA. It was actually developed by the military in the late 80s in order to inform their strategic plan. They wanted something their strategic leadership could use as a model to deal with their strategy. The world is volatile. Now, we're really in a VUCA world today. The speed of change, just with this COVID situation, there's constantly new information that's being updated. How many people are dying, how the deaths are being classified. Should you wear a mask? How is the How is it transmitted? But even before this, the speed of change had accelerated almost beyond what most of us can handle because of how technology has literally intruded into our life. You know, people interact with their cell phones as much as 150 times a day. That's a more intimate relationship than we have with human beings. It's interesting. But as the speed of change goes up, so too do your ability to make decisions have to go up. And if you're in any type of leadership position, then that's a challenge, because if you don't make a decision, you're behind the eight ball. If you make the wrong decision or a reactive one, there's a problem there too. Now, uncertainty we all know about because we're living it. We don't know what the future is. We have 14-day windows. That's the only guarantee that we have in the midst of this crisis. But even before this in the workplace, there's a lot of uncertainty. Organizations restructure, your job may get changed, your boss changes, your roles change. So planning is very tenuous. And all of this triggers that flight or fight reaction, which puts us in a position to not necessarily be thinking and responding as clearly. The other thing that technology has done and our situation today really drives home is the complexity of our world. That means there are more factors, and the interrelationship of those factors is really significant. So when something's complicated, you can take it apart and put it back together. One of my favorite shows is actually Velocity Channel. I'm a car buff. I have a 55 Thunderbird. I love vintage cars. And they put things back together. Now, they look a lot nicer than they were, but they put all the parts back together. But if you're dealing with an ecosystem, just think about the rainforest, for example. You can't pull all of those pieces apart and put it back together because there are relationships between each of the pieces. So in a complex world, it becomes difficult to analyze. And sometimes that can cause us to shut down. Ambiguity is a lack of clarity. We all know about that. We're in that today in a major way, but also every single day we're kind of in that, because as we move faster and faster with accelerated change and accelerated demands, our ability to communicate our expectations and interpret situations becomes more challenging. So the question you want to ask yourself is, what can you control? Know what you control, and then identify what's out of your control. You don't want to be whirling away worrying about what you can't control. So as I go through my own waves of anxiety and uncertainty and fear, I know that I can't control ultimately what the government does, what the virus does. I can only control myself. And that is our biggest asset. That is what we need to do, is control our own response. And what I want you to think about when you think about stress is not necessarily the stress, but how much energy that's draining you. Because if you can control your energy, you have a better chance of mastering your attention. And when you master your attention, you can get more of the right things done. So you may have seen this before. We have this brilliant and beautiful nervous system. It's called the autonomic nervous system. It could be the automatic nervous system. We have a sympathetic, parasympathetic. The sympathetic is the gas pedal. It puts us into overdrive because we have this survival instinct. And that's the stress reaction. It's primitive, it's the survival instinct. So when we are triggered, and this is what today's world is like, but also the modern world, we can be triggered by real things and we can be triggered by imagined things. So while the virus is real, the threat is actually pretty low. But in our minds, that threat can be amped up. And then the parasympathetic system is the brakes. It's supposed to be come on automatically to tamp down the sympathetic, to slow us down, to bring us back into harmony, into homeostasis. The problem is in a state of distraction, that doesn't work so well because the body doesn't really know when we've stopped being triggered. There's that low level trigger that happens. So our body is flooded with excess cortisol, which in an excess amount causes huge damage to our cardiovascular system. We gain weight because of metabolic resistance. Our digestive system is negatively impacted. And we also lose access to the restorative hormones like DHEA. So chronic stress actually has an incredible negative consequence if we don't do anything. Now, I want you to think about your sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system like an operating system. You know, Apple, we're on to number 11, Apple phone. The Microsoft system, I think, is up to number 10 in terms of revisions. But our operating system hasn't been upgraded in 100,000 years. We have the same nervous system that our ancient ancestors used. Now, we're going to be talking about what I call the software upgrade that's going to help you manage this nervous system, because while it was brilliantly designed for survival, it is primitive. So our brain, we actually have three brains. We have that primitive brain that is instantly triggered by some type of fear, something called the amygdala that gets tripped anytime anything in our environment reminds us of something in our past, because it stores every single experience we've ever had. And because, oops, I was clicking the wrong thing. And because of where that primitive brain and the limbic system or the emotional brain live, they're close to each other. Emotions can trigger the stress reaction, and the stress reaction triggers emotions. So while all of this is going on, our cortex, which are our logical brain, our high level function, that's offline. It can take minutes before that comes on board, which is why very smart people can do very stupid things when they're under the stress reaction. I don't know if anybody remembers recently, well, actually it wasn't recently in this fast-paced world, maybe it was 8 months ago, that Tesla, the owner of Tesla, ended up going on TV, smoking a joint and drinking some whiskey. Now, he had been up and working, he said, 100-hour week, and he was actually just beyond himself because of something that was going on. Well, that created a lot of problems, particularly for his investors and shareholders. It wasn't a good decision. So his cortex was definitely not online. We can probably think of our own life when we made decisions that in hindsight weren't that good. And that's why hindsight is 2020, because we're out of that stress reaction and we can very clearly think about something. So I wanted to share this. This is a Holter monitor tracing. It's from the Institute of Heartmath. And it is, a man is hooked up to a Holter monitor. You can see here that his heart rate is about 60 beats a minute. He's in a car with his wife and they have an argument, and his heart rate shoots up to 140 beats. So they go along, they go through the argument, and his heart rate comes down after, but it's still elevated. So his normal rate is 60, but right now he's ticking away at about 100 beats per minute. Well, that's using up a lot of energy. And if he would have had an intervention, which I'm going to show you shortly, he could actually have brought himself back down to his normal rate. Because just like the car example that I told you, the 55 Thunderbird, it is a really cool car and I absolutely love it. But it doesn't go that fast. It's called a cruiser. And that's what we do. We cruise. So maybe we're going about 40 miles an hour, 45. It can go 65, but it's not as much fun as is about 45 to 50. Okay. But at one point I had a Corvette and it was a very fast Corvette. It was a 700 horsepower. I was up to 90 miles an hour in second gear. I mean, I had to actually get rid of that car because I just got too many tickets. But that was a high performance car. It wasn't really designed for the road. So this is what happens when we allow the stress reaction to take over and we don't intervene and bring ourselves down into an optimal state. We waste our energy, and our energy is what triggers our attention, and that's how we use our time. So our emotions are going to change our activity in this brilliant nervous system. And what I want to point out here is this brilliant nervous system is what connects the heart and the brain, and that's significant. But let me first talk a little bit about our emotions. An iceberg is a great analogy. We all know the story of the Titanic. It sunk because of what was underneath the water and what they did not see. So our emotions are like that. It can sink us. They can sink us because underneath the water means they're also out of our radar, especially if we don't have self-awareness, if we're distracted, if we're in a stress reaction. We're not aware of the resentment or the insecurity or the despair, which I call one of the fatal emotions, the loneliness, the regret. But all these things underneath the surface are what drives our decisions and our actions. So the emotions are going to trigger the stress reaction, and that impacts what we feel, think, and do. But if we're not aware of it, we're going to get tripped and triggered and caught off guard. So this is just an example of what happens every day that has nothing to do with stress or COVID or distraction. This is just how we perceive. When something comes in from the environment, what somebody else is doing, whatever is happening on TV or the radio, we filter everything through our mental models. These are our belief systems, our past experiences. So we don't always view things objectively, even on a good day. So imagine what happens when you introduce the fear reaction. Things really get skewed because the body goes into that flight or fight mode, which is a survival mode. Your prefrontal cortex, which is where your good judgment is and your ability to make decisions, your broad perspective, that goes offline. So I just want to point this out because, as I mentioned earlier with the confirmation bias, the more we spend time online, the more overwhelmed our short-term memory is, the more we're constantly scrolling, the less open we are to a different perspective, creative ideas, innovation. So I just want you to tune into yourself. Am I shutting down as a result of stress? Because that's actually what's going to keep you from engaging in the stress interventions. So we have this primitive brain and this emotional brain, the limbic system, that is being triggered and guiding and directing everything we do, which is what causes our whole systems to shut down. So one of the interventions is breathing. So now we've covered the awareness piece where you know what's happening in your body. You recognize that when you're triggered or not triggered. I mentioned the interruption log, so I hope you use that for a day. I think you'll find it extremely interesting. So our breath, since we're breathing anyway, is a first line of defense. Because what happens when we're stressed? Our shoulders hunch up. And in fact, sometimes by the end of the day, you might have shoulder earrings. You know, shoulders curve in, your diaphragm goes up, and you're breathing very shallowly. So you're actually not exhaling all of that toxic CO2. So people have body aches, they little bit of brain fog, they're not thinking as clearly. So breathing deliberately is a good strategy because you can do it anywhere, you can do it in the moment. The man in the car, if he would have been instructed in one of these techniques, he could have brought his heart rate down in 20 seconds. So we're going to look at 3 different types of breathing. Count of 4 breathing, which is also called box breathing, the 4-7-8, and heart focused breathing. So I'm going to go through each one, and then I want us to practice it while we're on this webinar, because the more you can engage this when you're not in a stressful situation, the better able you will be to use it when you might get stressed. So the count of 4 breathing is actually one of the favorites of Navy SEALs. They use it. I was in a training with a few Navy SEALs when I did my HeartMath training, and they talked about this. They call the stress response the rabbit hole. Now their focus is life and death. They need to be 100% focused. The rabbit hole is that stress reaction, because once it gets triggered in our nervous system, we can't turn it off like that. But by using these techniques, you are going to be able to slow it down, prevent it. You're going to make its impact much less, and you're going to be able to keep that logical brain online so that it can guide and direct what you do. So the count of 4 breathing, so just think about a box. So you're going to breathe in on the count of 4, you're going to hold it on the count of 4, exhale on the count of 4, and then wait 4 seconds before you take your next breath. Okay, so let's do that now. So just breathe in on a count of 4, hold it on a count of 4, exhale on a count of 4, and then wait 4 seconds. What happens in the stress reaction is we get tunnel vision, and our mind becomes, we might have racing thoughts, overthinking starts. We're focused on the problem instead of the solution, which creates a sense of not quite desperation, but it creates a sense of fear and worry about what might happen. So there's a tendency to feel like I'm not in control. The problem is bigger than I am. The count of 4 is a great introduction into a mindfulness practice, because if you can use your breath to unhook your mind from that overthinking, you can then be more present. But as you breathe in and then you exhale, you also open up your chest. Your shoulders are going to drop down. Your chest opens up. You're forcefully exhaling, getting rid of all that toxic CO2, which is going to do a lot for your ability to focus, and to also feel more calm and in more control. So I highly recommend doing 2 or 3 count of 4 breaths before you do a meditation or a prayer. You can use this when you're walking down the hall. Definitely keep your eyes open because you can use this anytime to reset that primitive survival stress reaction. You know, a moment is 3 seconds. So mindfulness is being in the moment. So if you can use this, you can actually be more present. And as you learn to be more mindful, you increase your situational awareness. You're going to be able to maybe even see the environment for the first time in a different way. I recommend people using this at a meeting. They go into a meeting, they were just in another meeting perhaps, or they had a difficult conversation, or they just heard some bad news. And you might go into this meeting kind of preoccupied. So your body's there, but your mind is still somewhere else. So use count of 4 breathing to clear, to be present. And then I want you to practice what I call the attention reboot. Imagine you're in the meeting for the first time and look around. What do you notice? I worked with one director who said, I didn't realize that one of my team members wore glasses. I never saw them before. I didn't know that there was a tree at the entrance to my community. I'm always so preoccupied. You know, the beauty of using our breath to then open us up to a mindful way of being is going to increase our satisfaction because we're going to notice things. But that's also could be strategic. You're going to notice problems, you're going to notice details. You're going to notice more about the people you interact with so that you can be more tuned into them. So I would just like to know, you can put it in the chat, who thinks that they're going to use the count of 4 breathing at least 3 times a day, a couple times in the next few days, just to practice it. So now we're going to talk about heart-focused breathing. The Institute of Heartmath is an institution that has done research. Okay, so Trudy says I use this technique every day. Oh, thank you. Very good. Excellent. So I'd be interested to see what you think about heart-focused breathing then, because the Institute of Heartmath has done research for decades, and they've looked at the interaction between the heart and the brain and what that can do. And I'm going to share with you some very interesting information, because while you're breathing anyway, and now you're going to breathe more deliberately, we just talked about the count of 4 breathing. In heart-focused breathing, you're not going to necessarily count your breaths. You're just going to breathe more slowly and deeply than normal. And you can do that right now. You're not going to hold your breath. You're just going to breathe more slowly and deeply than normal. And you want to focus your attention on the center of your chest. So research shows when you bring your attention to some part of your body, that activates that part of the body. So when people work out, I've heard this from bodybuilders and professional weightlifters, when they focus on their muscles and they focus on that part of the body, it activates that. And that's really how you make the most out of your workouts. Oh, and in martial arts, it's used all the time. Thank you. Yeah, excellent. So you're going to focus on the area around your heart, and as you're breathing more slowly and deeply than normal, just imagine your breath going in and through your heart. So just try that now. breathing more slowly and deeply. And again, keeping your eyes open, because this is definitely a technique that I think is a great transition uh, strategy. Whether it's going from meeting to meeting, whether you're going from work to home or home to work. Because I think one of the side effects of all this technology is that when we're at home, we're not always at home. We might be shooting emails to different people. We're doing some research on the internet. We're looking things up on LinkedIn. And when we're at work, we feel guilty about the fact that we didn't spend all of our time with our family, so we might be texting them or contacting them some way. And one of the things you can do to cut down on that level of distraction is when you're at home, be totally and completely at home. And when you're at work, be there at work. And so Trudy says she uses this when she has difficulty sleeping because it works well. Well, thank you for that, because it actually does. And when you use this regularly, because in the beginning, you're going to do it for 10 seconds. Now, that's actually a long time when you're used to operating in 2-second intervals. Recent research found that our attention span is that of a goldfish, which is about 8 seconds. 8 seconds. So if you're going to do something for 10 seconds, it's going to require you to concentrate, which is good because that's going to build up your resilience and your reserve. So heart-focused breathing is the foundation of the Institute of Heartmath's energy management techniques, if you will. They have a whole series of techniques. And I'm going to talk about another one because it's what is going to help get us into the C of the ABCs. But before I do, I put this slide in because I wanted to show you the switch that you can use in your brain to break through that stress reaction. So I don't know if you can see the little red dot here in the middle of our brain. That is a symbol for the thalamus, which is a structure in the brain that actually acts like a switch. And it synchronizes our cortical activity or our brain activity. Because when the stress reaction is triggered, there's something called cortical inhibition. Basically, that's when we go offline. So when our brain goes offline, when the logical brain goes offline, it's like walking through your day with two hands tied behind your back because you're not thinking clearly, you're not thinking broadly, you have that narrow focus of a survival mode. I've got to get out of here or I've got to fight it out. And you may even see those reactions when you interact with people. Are they confrontational? Then they are more sympathetic driven. Do they sit back and withdraw? They're more parasympathetic driven. So heart-focused breathing is going to help you activate that switch so that you can engage your logical brain. But you're also going to be developing what's called coherence, which is similar to resilience. Okay, and what HeartMath has found, along with other researchers, but HeartMath has done just a fabulous job, and that is their mission to actually bring this to the world so that we can have a more present and open world. But remember how I said that the autonomic nervous system connects the heart and the brain. So when you engage the heart through the heart-focused breathing or the heart lock-in, which I'm going to talk about now, you're going to activate that switch. It also, by the way, stimulates a hormone called oxytocin. Most people know that hormone as the cuddle hormone, the love hormone, but it actually increases our ability to trust. And in today's hyper active, amped up world, that could be a very good thing. Our ability to trust each other more. So let's practice heart-focused breathing, because the heart lock-in takes it just a little bit further. So you're just breathing more slowly and deeply than normal. Just imagining your breath going in and through your heart, bringing your attention to the center of your chest. Good. And just practicing that for a few more seconds. Just allowing your breath to easily flow. And what you're going to do with heart lock-in is you are going to really activate what I call the power emotions of love, appreciation, courage, care, compassion. So you're going to use heart-focused breathing, and you're going to take it one step further as you get into the flow. After maybe the third breath, think about someone, something that you appreciate. I appreciate being in Florida right now. I appreciate the blue skies. I appreciate that it's a dry season and we don't have rain. I appreciate my health. I appreciate being here with you and to share this, knowing that it can change your life really if you make a commitment to practice it. So bring up some feeling of appreciation. Now this can be hard when you're used to operating in a chronic stress mode, because the one thing that chronic stress and distraction do to us is it makes us feel like problems are bigger than we are. It skews our focus, because remember, in a stress reaction, it's like having blinders on. We don't see the good that's happening out there. We only see problems. So that's one reason that a gratitude journal can be extremely helpful. Even if you just jot down one or two things every day, it will help balance that problem type focus that you may have because of your job or because of your situation at home. You know, I'm the sole caretaker of a family member, and so one of the things that I can get distracted by and really brought down by are the potential fears and concerns about the health of this person. I don't want them to get the virus. I don't want them to get sick. What if they have to go to the hospital? There's, you know, and next thing you know, it's like the wild horses. They're let them out of the corral and you can't contain it anymore. So if you can remember to use heart-focused breathing and then to activate and sustain that feeling of love, appreciation, or care, using your gratitude journal, if that helps you remind yourself of those things. And then the third step of the lock-in is you want to radiate that feeling. And what people tend to do is first radiate it out there. But my suggestion is that you're going to bring it internally. You want to radiate this to yourself. Because I think whether you're a woman, a caregiver, a healthcare provider, a lot of people tend to forget about themselves in the process. So radiate that those heartfelt feelings to yourself. Feel the appreciation for what you're doing in your world, how you're hanging in there, how you're helping other people. You know, just appreciate yourself. Sustain that feeling for about 15 seconds to start. Now that's going to seem like a long time because your thoughts are going to want to come in and intrude on that because you're so used to going from 0 to 90. So just let those thoughts drift out. You're going to want to just sustain that appreciation and care, the love and compassion, whatever you're imagining. Just let the thoughts go. And then after about 15 seconds, then you can radiate that love feeling out into your room, to your family, to your workplace, to the world, but just cascade it out, bridging a new dimension extended from your little world out to the larger world. And it's a pretty amazing experience. Another way you can use this, and this is really powerful. I've heard so many people tell me that it completely changed their relationship. Now, we all have those people in our life, whether they're at work or at home, that kind of rubs us the wrong way, kind of like sandpaper. And in fact, some people may really irritate us, okay? Use this heart lock-in as you give yourself appreciation for 10 seconds. Send that person all the love, compassion, and care, and you will literally transform that relationship. So that's pretty amazing. So let's go through this together. Just do heart-focused breathing. Bring your attention to the center of your chest, breathing more slowly and deeply than normal. Good. And now I want you to activate and make a genuine effort to bring up a feeling of love, appreciation, care, compassion, and deepen that feeling. Bring that feeling internally and focus on yourself. Appreciate yourself. Send yourself love for all that you're doing. Just let it flow. And if it's difficult, keep trying, because you'll break through if you keep at it. If it feels a little weird, that's okay. Just do it anyway. And now send that care and compassion out into the world, to a family member, to somebody that irritates you, to a project that you're doing. And just let those feelings of love, care, and compassion flow. It's interesting that the feelings of love, care, and compassion, those are the feelings that fuel movements. That's what creates innovation, is when we really love something, we have the ability to stick to it. That's what drives the monumental shifts in thinking or in the way we do things. In fact, we see that now in this crisis, the love of humanity, people are going above and beyond and doing good deeds and really wanting to help somebody else. But what I like about the lock-in is you want to do it first with yourself, because the more that you can accept love, the better able you're going to be to actually give love. So I hope that you use this. The challenge to you is to use this for get up to 15 minutes. But if you use it every day in the morning, that's usually the best time. Start with 10 seconds, get up to a minute, go to 3 minutes, and set a timer so that you know that you're actually doing this. So I hope that you can practice this. So the 4-7-8 is similar to the count of 4 breathing, where you're going to breathe in on a count of 4, going to hold your breath on a count of 7, and you're going to forcefully exhale on a count of 8. Now, this was developed by an integrative physician and has been reported to help you get to sleep within a minute. I prefer the heart-focused breathing because the C of our ABC is to make a connection. The more we can integrate our heart-centered emotions and our heart-centered mindset, the more resilient we're actually going to be, because it builds on our coherence, which is our resilience. It helps that cortical activation. It helps the oxytocin flow. It puts in motion a whole physiology that those other two breathing techniques don't do. The heart actually sends up 1,400 different neurochemicals to the brain to bring the body back into balance. So just using that care, compassion, and appreciation can dramatically change your physiology. There's tremendous research on that. So managing your stress is going to help you in the moment, using heart-focused breathing in the moment, but using the heart lock-in is going to help you activate your resilience, which is like a bank account. It's like your 401k. Every week you put money in, so you have it for your retirement. Well, every day, if you practice the heart lock-in, gradually increasing by 15, 20 seconds, you are developing an incredible resilience bank. So when stuff happens, you don't have to be reactive to it. And so one of our participants said, I regularly suggest the 4 agreements. Yes, indeed, that's an awesome way to shift and change your mindset. And so I recommend that you use the breathing techniques so that you can actually clear your mind of what I call the noise and clutter that happens when we're running from fire to fire or from situation to situation. So remember the ABCs, your awareness, use your breath deliberately, make that connection to gratitude and appreciation. It's a completely understated and underused tool. It opens up physiology that will enhance your creativity. It's going to make your interactions better. You're going to feel more joyful. You're going to feel more energized as a result. So I look forward to connecting you outside. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. This has been a fabulous webinar, and I appreciate everyone's connection. Are there other questions that I can answer as we close? Great. Well, then I challenge you to use the heart lock-in. Start with 15 seconds, get up to a minute, use it every day, and practice heart-focused breathing.